Basic Design class. This video is going to walk you through how to get started and to continue on to our large canvas painting of a zoomed in detail of your image. So I'm going to play from here. Okay, zoomed in painting. That's what I'm going to call it for now. I've also referred to it in class as a macro style painting, because macro is a term in photography for very zoomed in imagery. So this is what we're talking about. The focus of this whole unit is value and color, which are the elements of art that we're going to get to experiment with. As you work on this, I want for you to reflect upon the fact that as artists, we translate the way that we see the world through color, if we work in color. And so when color is more muted, such as and desaturated, less intense, such as the image on the left, we get a more quiet image, a calm image. Some might even refer to it as a dull image, or little more somber, perhaps, or various terms you can think of that relate to like a fog, perhaps, or just a dimmed, more neutralized color tone, versus the one on the right, which is highly colorful, lively, saturated, intense colors. And the color palettes and the intensity of the saturation of colors determines, in some regards, how our viewers take away the mood of an image. And it's just really fun to play with different kinds of color. So this is one of your chances to do so. Your process and goal with this project is to have an image that you then zoom into to just a detail of the image, but we're not necessarily focusing in a hyper focused way on the details within the details, but rather on brush stroke, on color, and on shape. So here is a full square of the 30 by 30 canvas made by a student a few years ago. And here's a few close-up shots of parts of her painting. And I show you these because her brushstroke style is somewhat loose. And so I want you to recognize that a very smooth, super precise, buttery brushstroke is definitely not necessary here. And in fact, if that's a style that you normally stick to, try to get a little more loose, try to get a little more gestural. But ultimately, the approach to your brushwork is very, very personal to your artistic style, so it is up to you. But I just want to show you some close-ups so that you understand that an image can appear to be very fine detailed when you look at it as a whole, but when you zoom in, the beauty of the artwork is also in the brushstrokes themselves. Like this one, I just love, love, love. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a few examples of some student work in the past. So this particular one, this is not a detail anymore. This is the entire painting within the square. Here's another large focus on one particular color and different values of that color. This one had quite a bit of focus on reflection, as well as the sort of perspective involved with creating this type of a shape, this pretty non-organic shape. So here's where you should start. Take pictures. Ideally, the image that you work with is one that you yourself, the artist, has taken, so that every part of this project has been selected and created by you and is entirely original. So where I'd like for you to start is go on a walk around your neighborhood and find and photograph close-ups of interesting shapes, textures, and other things that intrigue you. And when you're zooming up close, think of your camera like a microscope. Think of it as somewhat obscuring what the original object is and focusing on the fine details of it. Now, if you do this and you take a ton of photos and you just still aren't quite finding something that is fitting the vision that you had, I would say at another resort, you could also work with some magazines and crop in a square of some already existing photograph if the things that you are taking are just not quite getting there yet. But please do start with your own photography. However you wind up with these images, I want you to in some way crop them to a square, and then to use some sort of editing software to intensify the colors as you see fit to your artistic vision, and then submit your top 3 favorites to Canvas so that I can give you a little bit of feedback on what, just based on my experience, might be the best one for this project. I'm going to hop over to photos for a moment, just show you how easy it is to do these things. So here's an image that I have taken. Obviously not very zoomed in, but I really loved the colors. And I'm going to go up to Image and go to Show Edit Tools. I could also simply hit Enter on my keyboard and get this menu. This menu may not look exactly like yours. We may have different versions of this application, but you'll have ultimately similar tools. First, we're going to crop it to a square. And I want you to hit Aspect once you're in the crop. Go to Square so that it evens out your ratio, and then drag it to a part of the image that you really like if it's not quite zoomed in enough yet. So I could do it there. I just hit Enter. Or I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. Do that again. What if I just focused on the clouds? That could be a really cool image. And then I could look at filters for some different options. None of these are really giving me the colors that I want any better than what I already had. So I'm going to stick with no filter and go to Adjust. And I can play with a few things. I can play with the lightness and the darkness. Ooh, if I get darker, the colors seem to stand out a little bit more. And then on color, I can increase the saturation way, way up if I want to. Or keep it somewhere in the middle. If I go way the other way, I'm in grayscale. I'm going to go like right here, kind of like that. Oops, no, not what I want. I can also go down to levels and shift into some really cool things and play with some abstraction of my original image, which could be really fun. Kind of like those purples. It's almost like a sunset. Let's say I stick with this. I can sharpen the image if I like. I don't think it's doing much for my clouds, so I'll keep it down. Let's see. I'm going to go with this. Interesting. And hit done. This image, what I would do now is print out once I've made my final decision on it, that is. And by mine, I mean yours with my feedback. I'd print it in color if I had that option, and I would print it in black and white as well to be able to see the values too. Okay, back here. Once you've selected your image, you're ready to start gridding. So start with the grid on your canvas, and then move to the grid on your print, the printed paper. You're gonna need a ruler for this, and a long straight edge, or even in a pinch, some string perhaps that can help you grid out the canvas, and of course, a pencil. A semi-flexible measuring tape is a great thing to use. On the canvas itself, it is 30 by 30 inches. So I want you to start with making a line both vertically and horizontally every 6 inches across the edge of the paper. So the canvas. So what that means is when you're done, you will have 5 squares across and 5 squares down, for a total of 25 squares that covers your 30 by 30 canvas. So there's 6-inch squares, and there's 25 of them, and that gives you 30 by 30 inches, if I'm doing my math correctly. You'll do the same sort of process on your printed image. So if you print out your image and the photograph comes to, let me think about this. Let's say it only comes out to 5 by 5 inches, so you would make 1-inch squares on your paper and have the same amount of squares across, the same amount of squares down, and the same amount of squares total that you have on your canvas. You'll do the math to separate it out by 5, let's say, to have the same number of squares on your canvas and on your print that you would print out. Let's talk a little bit about color at the point that you're ready to paint. So, some of you are super familiar with color mixing already. Some of you may need some refreshers and maybe just want to play around with mixing color before you ever start this actual painting. So, first, some simple vocab on a color wheel. A color wheel is really just a diagram that shows you color relationships. And in this particular one, you've got warm colors on this side, and you've got cool colors on this side describing the temperature. And then when you go straight across, you have complementary color pairs. So violet and yellow are a complementary pair that when put side by side, make each other really vibrant because they're total opposites. Primary colors, which are colors that cannot necessarily be mixed to, but come from minerals in the earth, are red, yellow, and blue. And when you combine them, you will get orange. If there's more red, when you combine red and yellow, you would get orange. When there's more red in the mixture, you get a red-orange. When there's more yellow in the mixture, you get a yellow-orange, right? And so these This is your secondary color, your orange, and these are going to be your tertiary colors. Now, I think you can get the rest of the pattern figured out here, and that's a little bit basic, but if it's new information to you, start with just playing with color. If you add white to any particular color that you make, it's going to make it lighter. If you add the complement, meaning the opposite color, it's going to both make it darker and a little bit more, not a little bit, a lot of bit, more neutral. In other words, sort of muted, toned down, closer to a brown or a gray. To make an image, make a color even darker, once you've added the complement, take maybe a little bit of black if you have that available, and you will see a change. To make a neutral color, such as any of these here, like I just said before, it's going to require mixing all of your primaries. So your yellow, your red, and your blue. So if we think back to the complements, yellow is a primary, and violet is made up of both the primary red and both the primary blue. And like I said before, when you get violet and yellow together, you get a neutral, which is the same thing as saying neutrals are created from all three of your primaries. And if you want it lighter, you would add some white. If you want it darker, you would continue to add any of the darker colors that you have accessible to you and experiment till you get the color that you like. Okay, a lot of info. Certainly don't need to do all of that today, but that gives you a sense of where we are going with this project. Happy painting.